Hi folks, I'm David. I am the archivist at Museum of the Mind, and we're going to look at another series of our archival records. This time we're going to be looking at the Bethlem admission papers, which are under our reference BAP. They look a little bit, open that up, they look a little bit like this, and we have one of these admission papers for nearly every patient admitted between 1815 and 1920. They cover the terms under which the patients were admitted. After 1920 they become something a little bit different that we will also have a look at. Okay, so we're going to look at one of those out of the box I picked up. It's for Lydiahurst. She was admitted into Bethlem the 11th of July 1822. So this box just covers the year 1822. We have about a box a year up until the late 1880s, where sometimes we have 2 boxes per year. You can see that the petition comes in 2 parts. And the first, I'll open up to have a look at, in this case, is the bond. The formats change a little bit as time goes on. But these are the 2 people who are guaranteeing the fees for the hospital. And this is a bond for a sum of £100, a substantial amount of money in 1822. And this is to cover extra costs that the hospital may have incurred looking after the patient. The hospital had to have this. They had to feel that their costs were covered before they admitted anyone. The second and most interesting part is the next part, which will be the pro forma agreement for the admittance of Lydia. So as I open it up, and we'll use these weights because you allow a certain amount of give on them. Now the pro formas change a little bit over time, but there's a couple of important bits to them. The first is the instructions for the admission of the patient into the hospital. This is telling the people who wish to admit the person to the hospital what they need to do and what their responsibilities are. The certificate is a guarantee that the person is genuinely and quite seriously ill, and that must be signed off by the minister of the church, the minister of the parish, because they are the people who are administering welfare. The hospital is quite keen to take on deserving cases at this point, and they need to understand that the person is a deserving case, and that's what they're asking of the church warden. This person must be ill, this person must need the help of the hospital. At this point, 1822, the hospital is a charity. Beneath that is a certificate of insanity, and these will be 2 medical men who are promising that the person is actually ill and they have witnessed the illness, they've witnessed the mental health issues. In later case books we actually get these certificates written up, and there's usually quite a lot of detail about what the person has seen. At this point though, they're just signing it to say that they have definitely seen that the person is ill. And as we go over the page, finally at the very end we actually get the petition, and that is the person who's taking responsibility for the admission. Obviously the people who are going into Bethlem are seriously unwell and have serious mental health problems, and they would have been regarded as being unable to take the decision to admit themselves at this point. The hospital amends this later on. You start getting from around about the 1880s or so, voluntary boarders, people who are admitting themselves. They know they're not well, but at this point there needs to be somebody who's actually making the decision. In this case, the petition is signed by a chap called Joseph Haynes, who's signing it on behalf of Lydia. Let's see, you sometimes do get something about the admission, about what their relationship is, but that's not here this time. Anyway, we can tell from here though that Lydia has been disordered in her senses for about 6 weeks and no longer, and is therefore a proper object of your charity. And that's really the key sentence for the hospital. They want to ensure that the people who are being admitted are proper objects of charity. So from 1920 the patient admission files instead become patient correspondence files. Now, as you may have been able to tell on the first file we looked at, this doesn't really involve the patient at all. You know, this is stuff about their admission, it's the petition to the hospital, you know, it's information the hospital needs in order to make a decision. The correspondence files from 1920 are actually far fuller, and represent different viewpoints and all the correspondence the hospital received about the patient. So for this one, I'm just going to open up at random. It's file 26 from 1920, I believe. And you can see straight away there's a letter here to Fisherton House, which presumably is where this particular patient, who's Raymond Algernon Coote de Vliger, my goodness, he's clearly ended up being sent to Fisherton, which was a large private asylum in Salisbury. And the letters aren't in any particular order, but often they are letters from the family, as this one I imagine will be because it's addressed to Bethlem. They are letters from the hospital, a bit like this one, from the physician superintendent. As well as there'll be medical reports, there'll be the admission documents that we saw before. Raymond is 23 years old and male, and is said to have had a nervous breakdown while at Clifton College. So these are an incredibly rich resource. We've not yet digitised them. We are only just at the point where really these can be released as they begin in 1920. So under data protection, we have had to be a little bit careful with them. But if you find or you think that your family has had an admission into Bethlem, please do get in touch. We're going to work out a way where we can make them far more widely available. But there's an absolute fascinating resource waiting to be tapped here that represents the views not just of the hospital, but of the patient, and also the voices of the patient's family as well within. So taken from that file, this is the letter to Dr. Phillips, who would have been, I assume that's the chap who was physician superintendent at the time. I mean, it is stamped as his office. And this is from Raymond's mother, Catherine de Vliger. And at one point she says here, this is just in his letter file, "Excuse so long a letter." And it's a very emotional letter, and it ends with, "To me, his mother, my boy's love and thoughtfulness meant everything." And I think that gives a real insight into sort of how patients' families would have felt about. It's probably Catherine that placed Raymond into Bethlem in the first place, and it just gives some idea of the family bonds and possibly also the guilt and the sacrifices around that, all in one letter, which is one of the reasons we're really excited about these correspondence files. We think there's quite a lot that can be made from them.